Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment, guys. You know how precious this is to me as to welcoming our guests. And Kristof is coming to share a couple of things I feel very privileged and honored that he's here to share with us. That is his time. Time is such a precious commodity that each and every one of us have given 24 hours, and how we utilize time, respect time, honor time will tell us a lot about who you are. The other is the journey. The journey has powerful stuff. Why? Because it created Christoph that we are about to hear his wisdom, his knowledge, his insights. That stuff there is precious. And so we want to honor him that he is coming here to share some of both of these qualities with us here at Threads of Enlightenment so that we could become better human spirits while we're here on this planet called Earth. Christopher, welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, man.
And thank you. I treasure your trust. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. Welcome. One of the things that we always ask the guests when they show up is, how do you serve mankind? And I place that message because I want us and the audience to understand that we have a responsibility to mankind to serve others. And so that's is why I asked this question. How do you serve mankind in your current situation?
Well, I share in John Steinbeck's philosophy, writer of Mice and Men, East of Eden, Grapes of Wrath, Tortilla Flat, so many other books that are prized and treasured by everyone. He said his whole mission as a writer is to help people understand one another, and I'm the same in perfect likeness. So that's what I do. It informs everything I write about, and everything I hope to do in the future.
Yeah, that is an honor to have you, man, because that is it in a nutshell. If you understand those words, it is for us to honor each other as well and make sure that we learn because we are here for a time period. Some of us are here 80, 90 years, some of us shorter, but it's simply a time period that we are here housed within this body that makes us legal while we're here on this planet. One of our custom is to go back into the time machine, as I mentioned, which is we call memory. And we revisit some of the spaces, Christoph, that we visit for a time period. One of that is the family. We're usually there for a few years until we begin to embark on our own individual journey apart from the family. What was your family unit like?
Oh boy. Well, the thing is that I think that the human spirit is innately stubborn, but also seeks purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was a kid, I was abused like pretty violently. I'm gonna say pretty violently. It was very, very bad. And emotionally also, it was verbally, it was my in fact I mean, my father would hurt himself hurting me because that, like
Oh,
he would injure, and then
yeah.
and so and he struggled with addiction, alcoholism, as well as I have,
Yeah.
I've been sober now for 7 or 8 years.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. And it really there were so many different um, components of my life that seemed averse to me being there,
Yeah.
and to thriving. So I was trying to repudiate all of those, because there was Shakespeare. I have Tourette's. If anybody
Oh,
doesn't
that's it.
doesn't already know. Um,
I'm familiar with it.
yeah, I'll just make sure the audience knows if it's Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I really struggled with self-worth. But I
Hmm.
knew one of the things that I learned, because I'm not religious now, but when I when I did go to church, one of the things that I always saw that was said in gentle earnest, was that we had worth. We had innate worth,
Yeah.
as human beings, and I believed that because I think they believed it. The people that I was
Yeah.
attending church with, they really truly believed that, and I thought that was a beautiful thing, and I held on to that.
Hmm.
very tightly and desperately
Yeah,
to survive those uh, times. It was really injury. It would have been really. I don't know how I would have otherwise.
yeah.
Shakespeare.
That's powerful. It's a powerful tool to hold on to, Christoph. You have to. One of the reasons why I put this together because I'd lost some really good friends to some people I cared about to suicide,
Yeah.
and I wanted to create a space by which people can have a conversation, share their story to make others aware that they're not alone. And even as dark as their story is and their journey is, there's someone there that has gone through some a lot of darkness in similar manner that can walk with you if you simply reach out and to fixate your belief on that aspect of the human being that
Hmm.
we are worth something
Hmm.
is a powerful um, motivator, if you will, to continue. As you continue, Christoph, being in that particular space of drama as a young man, how were you able to continue? I know you hung on to that. How
Hmm.
did that hanging on to that belief? How did it sustain you in all of that trauma that you were going through as a young individual on this planet?
I noticed that uh, through observation, one of the things you learn when you're very physically abused
Yeah,
is how to read people. You have to because I had to learn to read my father, who was really volatile, and
yeah,
and his caprice like meant that I could be beaten any moment for anything. Even looking at him wrong would
yeah,
what he perceived was wrong. So I had to learn to study people, and I realized one of the most prevailing emotions that people experience is anxiety and
hmm,
fear, and that is a really destructive um, emotion,
yeah,
oftentimes,
yeah,
because it really damages the way we see the world, and really uh, it really diminishes our ability to handle it, and
yeah,
also it defaces it defaces our whatever dignity and that we try to project.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and so for me, uh, I really so much of what I did to survive had to do with overcoming that realization was that I needed to be better than that,
yeah, yeah,
and I needed to understand people on a with compassion. Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare. It's really hard to like enumerate all the different things we do like every day and all the
yeah,
different it's like it because we call it self-deception, right?
yeah, yeah,
We tell ourselves that we're doing that like when you but these are really actually very healthy ways to manage our fear of the world and of our fear of other people. Is to remind ourselves like even when that often what they're doing to you is not a reflection of you, it's what they're experiencing.
yeah. That's a tough lesson to learn, but we do learn it eventually
Hmm.
that the individual, the principle is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So
Hmm.
if they are hateful towards me, that hate is towards themselves, and it's simply manifesting with them reacting towards me. And so I had, I'm sure that the terminology that we use is abuse. And as a young man myself, I had suffered some of that from family, and Christoph, it caused me to frame much of my relationship with the outside world based on the trauma that I was getting from the inside, from those quote unquote that loved us. Um, as you are relating to others from the outside, when you're dealing with your the people in your sphere, we call them friends, and family and stuff like that. What was your relationship towards them being in trauma, experiencing trauma? How did you live in cohabitation with others as a young man?
You mean like with my family or with just
Yeah,
people in
family
general?
and friends and stuff like that. What was
Well,
that like
there's so
interaction?
many trauma manifests, and really it ends up, coming out almost destructive as it did coming in,
Yeah.
and so for me, it takes a very long time to learn to trust people,
Hmm.
because a fear of abandonment. It's funny because I saw something the other day that trauma isn't just what happened to you, it's what didn't happen to you. If you didn't
Yeah.
have the support and love and affection of your parents, that's a really difficult trauma to overcome, because
Yeah.
if there's anyone in the world that's meant to love you unconditionally, uh, any mortal being, it's your parents, right?
Hmm.
Um, but when you don't get that validation, it is very, very difficult to reconcile any notion of self-worth with reality. Not like,
Yeah.
so it's I've had a really difficult uh time, but I've recently, because I wrote my book, Shakespeare. I wrote my book. Before I wrote my book, I didn't really understand my place, and I didn't feel like I had the dignity, or I couldn't take pride in what I had done, which isn't true, because by the time I wrote my book, I was an award-winning journalist, photographer, um, and I had won awards in different for fiction and for poetry. I started in the U.S. Navy,
Hmm.
and I mean, I volunteered. I did so many things, honestly. But until I had done something that I could take pride in, I felt like I couldn't contribute, and therefore I was really insecure in every relationship I had, whether it be friends or romantically or familial. It really, yeah, it really comes down to feeling like you have some sort of purpose, and that
Yeah.
purpose is recognized by others.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
Shakespeare.
I agree with
Mm,
you. I absolutely agree because one of the statements that I always say to people, Christian, is to Christoph, is to find your purpose and become. It'll help you to become purposeful. It's a
mhm,
tool that simply assists you to become.
mhm,
Um, One of the things that I experienced in my trauma was because I felt that if my parents, the folks that we call parents, the ones that are supposed to be the carers of you, can violate you in such a fashion, then the others also can and most likely will. And so, what
mhm,
that belief governed my entire life, how I approach people, how
mhm,
much of myself I allowed them to experience. All of those things as a young man who went through trauma from the hands of my parents and my grandfather. I it caused me to respond to the world a certain way. It was not until I was in my 20s and 30s when I started investigating some of those feelings that I had as a young man that came up from time to time. As you moving through, you mentioned that you were an accomplished writer even before that first book. Christoph, when in your life did you begin to um, lean towards that or have that inclination, if you will, of one that has a knowledge and understanding of how we put together words and we call that writing? How old were you when were you had that inclination of that I liked writing?
Oh man, I was it's it's been there for since I was 13. I was
Yeah.
13 when Shakespeare. I was in a math class, and it was during the war in Iraq. Um, and we were tasked with writing a letter to soldiers serving overseas, and I considered it something that was very solemn, and I don't know why. I knew then that I wanted to serve in the military
Hmm.
already, but and so I really I committed myself wholly to it, and I remember when I started writing, I just felt like a kind of music start to play in my head,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was the most profound experience. It truly was something like an awakening, and it just something about it made sense to me.
Hmm.
Uh, and mm, it, it's funny because as long as I can remember, I've always told myself that I wanted to be interesting.
Yeah.
Shoot. In conversation, I did not want to be boring. I thought being boring was a death sentence somehow. Um,
Yeah.
right. Shakespeare. When I wrote the letter, I had an obsessive way of thinking about how I spoke, and that was partially induced by, of course, abuse. You have to be very
Hmm.
careful with how you talk.
Yeah.
But it was more to that. I truly saw the romance of language, the beauty, the magic of language. To me, it's the only magic I think we've ever created. Like
Yeah.
the fact that we want to understand people and that we want to be understood is like the most beautiful thing
Yeah.
that I know. And so writing the letter was partially informed by that. And and uh, and so whenever I wrote it. I gave it to my teacher. I left the class in the middle of the day. This is hours later. I was swarmed by a bunch of kids at lunch who said that the teacher had been reading my letter to every class and that
Oh.
she wanted to publish and that she wanted to publish it. And so when I they said it was really good. Even a kid and I bring this up every time. It's kind of funny. Even a kid that hated me, he despised me. He yeah he did not like me at all. Even he considered he's like, yeah, that's a really good letter. So it's like
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm starting to believe this a little bit. There's something about this. So I went to my teacher and I passed her in the hallway and she stopped me and she's like, "Oh my God, your letter is so beautiful. I want to publish it in the newspaper." Um, and it was then that I knew because for me the writing it was effortless. It just felt
Yeah.
I just did it
Yeah.
I only wrote it once and I had and I had achieved that effect and then I knew just based on the reaction, it's so extraordinary that when you realize something that you have something of a gift in,
Yeah.
and the effect that it's able to achieve in a positive way is so empowering and
Yeah.
life changing. And so that like people say, like do hobbies and do different things like that, and to explore. It really is in an effort to build yourself up, and like we were talking about earlier, finding purpose and living purposefully. So for me, it was then that I kind of did that. That's when it kind of started. But I didn't write anymore until I joined the Navy,
Yeah.
and I picked it up again. And I really was just experimenting with words, with
Hmm.
sounds, the music of language, without any sort of with maybe 10% of the logic applied, very loosely abstract.
Yeah.
It didn't have to make sense. Uh, yeah, and so it was just developing it from then on and
Yeah.
off until I started doing it really regularly.
Yeah. That's one of that's beautiful. Uh, it relates to that story. How do we serve mankind? It
Hmm.
is we serve mankind. The answer, one of the answers, is that out of our gifts, our talents,
Hmm.
and we usually discover those sometimes at a young age, like you did, and sometimes we uncover it. I believe we dabble with it when we are young, and then as we move through life, it becomes known to us, if you will, because before that it wasn't known to us that, hey, this is a gift or a talent. But when it becomes known to us, we can then utilize it to serve others from. And when we serve from our gift, I believe we do it with a degree of um, people call it, like ego, but I think it's more of a security. You know that this is my gift, and I think there's not an ego within it. It's just
Hmm.
that you know, and when
Hmm.
you move from that space, it becomes really powerful. So here you are. Why and how did you take into you at this young man? Because you said at 13 you knew that you were going to be in the military. Why was that, Kristof? Did you know at that age that you were going to be in the military? What was it in you or around you that caused you to say, yeah, I think that's where I'm going to
Um, so many things. But it really is the notion of valor,
go?
which I think is the purest form of love, right?
Yeah,
Because sacrifice. I mean, it was like it's kind of funny. I bring it up every time because it really is, but it really was the most compelling. Okay, so the visual I've ever seen. The movie Saving Private Ryan shows
hmm
the Normandy invasion right at
yeah,
the beginning, and seeing the corpsmen, which is the medics, for anyone that
yeah,
doesn't know, the corpsmen going like running through fire and artillery and bombs like dropping from planes to perform rescue care on soldiers that were like certainly mortally wounded or and to spare them either hurt or the loss of life or limb. I thought was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And given Shakespeare, the amount of abuse I had experienced, I knew that what I knew from the really intense study of art and the way that people interacted that giving yourself for someone else in that context was really something worthwhile and noble, and that people treasured that, really
yeah,
truly did. And so I wanted to live a life of consequence in that sense. Um, it was the most important thing in the world to me. So when I decided, I saw that, the way that my parents, I knew I wanted to be better than that.
yeah,
And um, the most relevant, like the most helpful way to describe the kind of mentality I had, which is really kind of cheesy, but the notion of being a knight is
yeah,
really
yeah,
in the sense that without all the baggage of the historical context of reality,
hmm
but in terms of its actual um, the principles that informed the creation of that
yeah,
of being defending those who can't defend themselves, and there's just, I mean, no, so
yeah.
it really was about that, honestly.
Yeah, mine was really funny, Christoph. Mine was out of the samurais. For some
Yeah.
reason, the belief of the samurais. I grew up in British Guiana, and I don't know where I got that that stuff from because in that
Where'd you
country
grow
there's
up?
not much British Guiana in South America.
Okay, okay.
So we didn't have much of the quote unquote samurai teaching around that culture, but for some reason I was drawn towards the samurai code of arms, if you will.
Hmm.
And I found that it inspired me and pushed me through my dark times and honor. These are still things that mean much to me because I adapted those as a young man to move through my stuff. And I looked for it in relationship with others. And if they didn't had that quality in them, I would not tell them a thing about who I was. Isn't that really weird how we do things? So here you are, you identified with the knights and you held on to those principles, if you will, to move
Hmm.
through your life. Do you remember the first day, Kristof, that you showed up at and you made the decision to go? You remember your first day when you got there? What was that like in your mind when you were now a young man, older young man? You are you had that dream when you were 13. You're at the recruitment office. They're taking you to train and all that stuff. How did you feel when you were about to embark on that quote unquote dream that you had inside of you?
Well, Shakespeare. I think that there's moments, there's a sort of disillusionment that occurs in different parts of
Yeah,
your life.
yeah,
Like for example, I think the whole notion of being a knight was really born when I was 6 years old. My dad had really viciously beaten me, and I was outside, and I was only 6, and I told myself I would never treat my children like that.
yeah,
And I remember that moment.
yeah,
And so it's a similar thing when I joined the Navy. I knew that I was about to be disillusioned about some things,
yeah,
but there's a planet. I needed a planet to orbit, a planet of principle,
yeah,
uh, and so I can distinguish what was good and helpful in developing uh, like healthy notions towards other people and towards myself uh,
hmm,
and otherwise. And so for me, it was I was really apprehensive,
yeah,
but I knew that it was uh, I knew that ultimately it was going to be life changing,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
I was going to develop relationships with people that I had never been able to before because of the way that humans develop closeness with others, which is
yeah,
often by physical proximity, you
hmm.
know, and when you're forced to cooperate, not in a way like when you're yeah, in every other circumstance you don't really have
Yeah,
to, but with a physical closeness, there's a kind of surrender that everyone I think, except the people who see themselves as leaders,
yeah,
distinguish themselves in that sense, but everyone else uh, is really trying to is really trying to make concessions in many senses so that we can all sort of live in harmony.
yeah,
And so, yeah, there were so many things I was worried about, and also that I was encouraged by.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, that's isn't it uh, one of the lessons that one must experience and go through all through life. One is that surrendering, as you said.
sure.
It's a common thread in one's life as you move through, whether it's good or bad. Um,
Hmm.
because I grew up in the church as well, and I remember one of those incidents where Jesus Christ was in this garden praying, and he didn't want to surrender. And I
Yeah.
know he was to the point where he was sweating blood. So I always tell
Wow.
people when none of us has gotten, and I can't remember reading Kristof or anyone else who got to that point battling surrender where they were sweating blood. So, but he had to do it, and just like everyone else, we have to do it as well. And
Hmm.
once we make that decision to surrender, life begins to get a little interesting from the minute we make it.
Yeah. Hmm.
And some of those interesting things, um, most of them are out of our control, and we just
Hmm.
have to learn how to dance within that surrendering. Here you are, you're in your lifelong dream as a Marine. You were governed and guided by the principles of knights. When you got there, did you find some of those principles?
I was just thinking that there's a stark but subtle difference between surrendering and putting your weapon down.
Yeah,
You know.
oh yeah, there is.
And so yeah, and actually, like true surrender um, is a much more ambitious thing to do, and
Yeah.
honestly more helpful. Like you said, like true, like we were talking, you said a moment ago. Um, so sorry, what was the original question though? Sorry.
The question was when you got to the location of the institution, if you will, of the Marines, and what drove you or what compelled you in that direction was that the principles, if you will, of knighthood that
Mhm.
caused you to head in that. You saw the nobleness in within the movie, and it translated that type of belief into you. When you got there, did you encounter some of those that caused you to go there? Did you encounter some of those qualities, if you will, when you arrived into the boot camp and
Mm.
further on within the system, as they say?
Well, these are things like especially when you're in a new environment, you make
Yeah.
so many observations. You're trying to understand, like we humans are like this is very natural and necessary part of survival. We examine it's a very serious thing. I think every human knows
Hmm.
what I'm talking about. And so when we see those qualities in other humans, that's what we're looking for. And
Yeah.
most of all, the most important thing is what is my relationship with the people around me, and what is their understanding of the world. And so when you meet people that are very seriously noble, and they
Hmm.
actually live that truth, it is a very encouraging thing. And so you see those you're affirmed, in your
Yes.
judgment.
Yes.
And so, and it's so important. I think one of the things that offends people the most when you have a great deal of when you're abused and you have every cause to have mistrust. People don't like to be thought of as evil or malicious.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes it so hard. Like whenever if you're having a conversation with someone and you think that they think that you're doing something wrong or they're doing something wrong, and you make that assumption, it imparts like to them that they're not somehow trustworthy.
Yeah.
And that's a that without even if they don't realize it, they find that notion offensive.
Yeah.
And it's really about seeking the good, and it's really cheesy, right? You think it's not helpful,
Hmm.
but it's absolutely
Yeah.
true. To sometimes if you're not in any kind of mortal danger, um, you have to tell your brain that's enough. We need to trust our environment
Yeah. Yeah.
and try to be productive with other humans. And it honestly it yields so much like it's such so many healthy relationships you can develop
Yeah.
with other people. And yeah, because anxiety is like an infection,
Hmm.
and that it flares up sometimes, and it
Yeah.
takes a long time to diminish. And the only way to diminish it is what I've found is through love, through experiencing the love from others.
Yeah. It is one of the most strongest of the forces out there, and energetic force, if you will, and we have to learn how to maneuver through them when they manifest. Mine, people listen to my story. One of the things, Christoph, was I was 20 something, I think 21, 22 years old, and I was on campus heading to class. And the floodgate of a memory of some things that my dad had done began to rush into my memory, if you will, to the point where it was so overwhelming. I was running on the campus to find a place because I knew that this memory coming and what it was, I knew what it was because I'm familiar with what happened. I knew I needed to be in a space, quote unquote, safe space that I can pretty much break down. And I don't want
Hmm.
the campus to see me, as a young man
Hmm.
breaking down, crying like a little baby in the corner. So I had to go find that space so that I can move through this emotion. And I had to learn, man, how to surrender, as you said, how to have relationships with people because of this, those types of strong emotions and anxiety and all the different things that will come up with trusting a person in your life and opening up to them and allowing the relationship to blossom, if you will. So here you
Hmm.
are, you were put into a close confinement, you're moving through as a young man, and you're gaining wisdom, knowledge, and all of those things from these relationships. As a someone that is now studying, because the journey as you become an individual questioning and looking into human behavior, you're actually studying yourself because you're part of this human race. As you are studying human beings and beginning to understand a little more, Christoph, what did you started to notice about you, because we are now in this situation where you're going to be pressured in the sense of closeness with others? and you're going to start experiencing some things about you. What did you learn while you're there about Kristof? Um, Having to deal with others, having his background, the trauma from that, all of this thing. How did you survive, if you will? How did you manage? How did you live on a daily basis?
Hmm. Well, I realized how anxious I was,
Yeah,
which is really it's really strange. There was a period, Shakespeare. I had a period where for 3 days in my entire life, this has never happened before.
yeah,
That happened last year. But for 3 days, uh, I didn't experience anxiety, and it had to do with the fact that I was informed of a decision by the government that I would be receiving what I needed to
yeah,
receive care for Tourette's and being disabled in Shakespeare. And I remember in those 3 days, it was the most profound peace I've ever felt in my entire life. But what
yeah,
I noticed, which is the most important thing, was how anxious everyone else was around me. I did
wow,
not know that before.
yeah.
I thought that I was the most anxious person, and that was noticeable. But truly, everyone is
Yeah,
terrified at every moment, all the time. And
yeah,
I saw that from, honestly, I would say it's more than 90% of the people that I watched while I had these 3 days of remission
yeah,
from
yeah,
anxiety, that people um, are terrified,
yeah,
and that everyone is experiencing so much of it that it takes very little for people to, like what you said a moment ago, like to have breakdown.
yeah,
And everyone is expressing this sentiment everywhere I see. Everyone is expressing the exact same thing. They're almost like they're in disbelief. They're like,
yeah.
is everyone feeling this way? Because it seems like, and everyone's like, oh yeah, yeah, oh no, and no, and so yeah, I just for those I realized how much people needed comfort.
Yeah,
Truly, like people really look. You have no other choice sometimes.
yeah. Isn't that
You know.
beautiful, though,
Mhm.
Christoph, that you got an opportunity to disconnect for a period, and within that period of the disconnection,
Mhm.
your observation is that, wait a minute, everyone else is plugged in and has always been plugged in. And this
Mhm.
is the norm, if you will,
Mhm.
being plugged in. And you could see it in the faces of men and women every day, children going to school, and everyone, Christoph, hasn't have that opportunity like you did for that period of time to disconnect and see. You were looking into to the reality of truth, if you will, amongst
Mhm.
men, everybody, and having those 3 days out, and you made those observations. Um, uh, how was it when you recognize, because you still have to live, when you recognize that you had plugged back in? How did you
Mhm.
respond when you having the reprieve? Because all of a sudden you're back in it and you don't even know that you're back in it because it's so
Mhm.
familiar. But then again, because you had that revelation of being outside,
Mhm.
you will have those thoughts coming back. How did you reconcile that when it
Oh
came?
man, it was truly. In fact, the thing is, I did know it was happening. I could feel the peace escaping.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I on the fourth day, I felt uh, about half of the way I felt the 3 days before, and I realized I was starting to obsess and ruminate and feel anxious again.
hmm,
And by the fifth day, I was back to the way I'd been for my entire life. And so I had a number of revelations, and that one of them, most people are anxious, truly anxious, uh, and but contextually, these are appropriate responses. Like I lived in Lafayette, Louisiana, where there was a mass shooting
Mm.
at the movie theater that I would go to.
Wow.
And 11 people were shot.
Wow.
And I went to that movie theater like 2 months before. Like I didn't go to the movie theater that often, but that didn't matter.
Yeah.
When it happens at like a place that you go to, like a grocery store or like a movie theater, or like it is so violating.
Yeah.
You do not realize, like, because you can't. It's impossible to go into that space ever again. Not just that space, but any space that shares its likeness in any way. I even now for the movie, like I didn't go to the movie theater I went twice in 8 years after that,
Wow.
because I could not do it. It was so anxiety inducing to be in a movie theater, and because it happened like down the street from my house. It's like a little over a mile from my house.
Wow.
Um, and I was working in Shakespeare. I was working in a dispatch next to ambulance dispatch, and when I saw a bunch of executives from the ambulance company that I worked for running into the dispatch room, I was like, "What is going on?" And that's when oh God, it was horrifying. And so I realized, that it really does transform the way you see the world. And the other thing is that I realized that I feel like a lot of people who don't have anxiety disorders, it's quite unfair. It's quite unfair that because they don't understand, and they don't extend compassion
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, what's the big deal?
What's the big, yeah, what's the big
I
deal
don't
with
get it.
it? Or,
What's the problem?
yeah. Yeah.
They don't even know, like the amount, like your nervous system is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were in a lava pit of anxiety and so I mean so many other emotions that accompany or comorbid to that. Rage towards the world that you're experiencing this way, for
Yeah.
one. And and these things, like these emotions, manifest in really unhealthy ways, but it should be to the prevailing. It should be that they understand that, but and that they offer, like I said, compassion, but it's I've found that they often don't.
Yeah.
And that's so I think that a lot of people being able um to come forward and say that they know what that feels like, and that they
Mm-hmm.
experience that every day, has been really empowering to a lot of people, to say that that anxiety truly does like rule so much of their life, and
Yeah.
escaping that and managing that has been like their chief concern for years, especially after the context of our lives. We're in a depression. The fact of the matter is, like, the income inequality now is worse than it was in the Great Depression. It's
Oh,
hard.
yeah.
It's more. In fact, it's funny because we have a term to describe poverty to the extreme, and that's Dickensian. When circumstances are Dickensian, like Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist, like
Mm-hmm.
he and I mean so many other works that describe like abject poverty. We call it Dickensian. That was during the Queen Victoria's reign, or whatever, Victorian era. It's harder now to buy a house than it was during that time.
Yeah.
Being, I mean,
Yeah.
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. There's so many reasons for people to be anxious, especially people from my generation. Whenever
Yeah.
um, people that are my age, people that are baby boomers, the older generations, they had 20. By the time they were my age, they had 20% of the national wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do you know what the millennials have in respect
No.
at the same age? It's two
No.
percent.
Wow.
It's 2%. That I cannot. The extraordinary disparity. It is so. I mean, it's completely destroyed so many people's faith
Yeah.
in
We see
systems
it
and,
today.
and in one
Yeah.
another, and it's just
We see it today. The
yeah.
value, Christoph, of as a young man, I'm 62. Um, the value of a penny back in my day, I could go to a store as a young kid, and we just need a couple pennies, and we thought we were rich. Now, those couple of pennies, I could walk into a store and come out with a whole handful of stuff. the value of a penny today. What can I get? So you look at the poverty back in my day, I could utilize a penny. There was a value to it. Today, removed many years from there is no value in a penny. And so we are living in this illusion that we are thinking that we are getting richer. And the house that you would buy today for several $100,000 back in the day was $20,000,
Mm-hmm.
10, $15,000. So then when you look at stuff like that, then you look at the value of that house, that same house, because our great grandparents are going to sell that house that they bought for 10,000 for over half a million
450,
dollars.
500,000.
Yeah, so what are you talking about when you talk about the value? I think we're living in a greater illusion than those that were back in the day, based on our current thing that we call a value. A millionaire is suffering, in some cases, so
And
it's
because
amazing.
if you consider the demographic breakdown of the United States, it's Black History Month, right? So if you consider
Yeah,
the demographic breakdown of the United States and how much wealth each group has to their
yeah,
respective, they actually, Black Americans actually, they make up 14 to 17% of the population in the United States,
yep, mm-hmm.
and they have 2% of the wealth.
Well,
That's
yeah,
funny. The numbers align. That's how I remember that because
yeah,
they're both 2% of the millennials and Black
yeah,
Americans, there's it's just impossible to reconcile those numbers, like, and say that
yeah.
the system isn't
The system is
designed to
not,
be.
it's
Yeah.
not designed to, it's not a sustainable system to
Mhm.
maintain the population. When it is recognized by the millions and the masses, all hell is about to break loose, but that's a different
Yeah.
different
I would say that
podcast.
every revolution that I know of, the
Yeah,
Haitian Revolution that's in Saint Domingo,
yeah,
the French Revolution.
the
I mean, all of
French,
these
all of it.
revolutions, all of them
Yeah,
only they were induced by starvation. Nothing
yes,
else will bring people to do anything
yeah,
except for that. There's nothing. There's no other revolution that was born of, and like, it's truly, there's plenty of factors that can manifest a lot of intrigue in the notion of revolution, but ultimately it's that there's that one. Who's that? There was a writer that said we're 9 square meals away from
from
total anarchy.
revolution. Yeah,
That's
it
absolutely true. That's absolutely
yeah.
true. And yeah. Mm.
My belief, Christoph, is when a human being looks at their current state of living, whatever that is, and they look at the punishment of their state, and when it equalizes, where life
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
living is in their mind is just as worth like dying. That equilibrium, when
Mm-hmm.
that happens, all hell will
Mm-hmm.
break loose, because they're going
Mm-hmm.
to look at that
Mm-hmm.
and go and say, it's
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the society needs to be aware of. When that equilibrium happens, there is no turning back, because that
Mm-hmm.
individual look at their life as has no value. It's worth the same as dying. Probably I'm better off
Yep.
dead, if you will. It would be the terminology that they would say. So yeah, it gets
Mm-hmm.
a little crazy. So here you are, Kristof. You're growing. You're seeing all of this. You're out of the Marines, and you're now coming back into quote unquote society,
Mm-hmm.
into that different industry, the industry of society, the normal thinking, if you will. How did you assimilate coming back in? Because again, you were put in this pressure cooker of close proximity with people, have to surrender certain things so that you can maintain relationships and learn and all of that. When you're
Mm-hmm.
coming back in now to regular living, if you will, how did you assimilate and with yourself? Because that's the first thing. And how did you manage those that were around you, but again, they're not in close proximity? but they're there. How did you manage that?
I realized that most people, one of the first things is that most people are uncooperative and really have no regard like for what's going on around them. You know,
Yeah,
like for example, like when I was in school, I remember like these two girls would always come into class and they were always really loud and they always had bags of chips that was like, and they were through all class. And like it drove me freaking nuts. Like every single
yeah,
time they came to class, it drove me insane. Like, and I just realized like you could never get away with that in the military. Like you just
yeah,
couldn't. Like, like if you acted that way in the galley or in the cafeteria, and you like it all it takes. It doesn't even have to be someone that's an authority in your like in your chain of command. They just have to be above you in rank. So like
yeah,
they could be a culinary specialist, someone that prepares meals for everyone, and they could be in the back and they could be stirring soup, and they're in E6 and you're in
yeah.
E4 and you're acting a fool. They go in there and like all they got to do is come out and like it doesn't matter that you were a corpsman or like some kind of network engineer or something. They're just gonna be like, excuse me, you're gonna behave, or you're gonna get, you know what I'm saying? So, and so you really had to be that. Like, I actually I had a shipmate that uh was walking on base,
Mhm.
and he got someone called his attention to something, and he had walked in front of them or something. Anyway, he blew them off. He actually went to captain's mast for that. It's because it
Wow,
turned out that the dude he blew off was a lieutenant and
wow.
out of uniform, and
Yeah,
he didn't know because I think he gave him the finger. He's like, nah, leave me alone. And yeah, it was the whole. But I mean, there's a lot of nuance to the situation that I think is relevant. He had served overseas already in the war, and he was really not doing well
yeah.
with that. And so it's really it was not a very it's a strangely not progressive view sometimes,
Yeah,
and does not it doesn't honor uh, like a lot of the trauma that is induced by being in those circumstances. And so it's really disappointing. Like now that I think back, I'm really disappointed in the way that he was confronted and then ultimately um, treated. But yeah, it's really quite something that when you realize that most people they don't have to cooperate, and so they
hmm,
don't.
yeah,
Um, and then that ends up like when someone puts you in a bad mood, like because they're rude to you or whatever,
yeah,
and then you sort of it infects you, and then you pass that on to another person.
yeah,
It's so much easier to be cruel, you know, because it's what is
yeah,
it? It's predicated on fear, and fear is like is about getting away or pushing
yeah,
or changing, transforming something. It's about like you know what I'm saying? It's
yeah.
often
I
it's a very
understand.
violent
Yeah,
reaction to your environment.
yeah. It is. Fearfulness is one of the core energies that we live in on a constant basis.
Hmm.
And because we are living in that fearfulness in a constant basis,
Hmm.
politicians can come and take advantage of that
Hmm.
fearfulness. And when they
Hmm.
speak to it, it riles us up, disconnects us from logic, and we become animals. We become tools in their hands
Hmm.
to accomplish whatever they want. And most of
Hmm.
those guys are uh, never honorable. Very few of them are. Because if you look back in history, and from talking to you, Kristof, I know that you're a student of that. When you look back in the history, the leaders that utilize that fearfulness to lead, truly lead, we read about many of them in books and stuff like that. And the
Hmm.
ones also that took it and that had a dark heart, we read about those as well. But when people are living from in that state of fearfulness, they're easily manipulated and they don't think
Hmm.
that they are. And they become pretty crazy when they you confront them. So it's really hard to unplug them because they've been living there all their life. They don't know what
Hmm.
unplug means. So here you are in this. You began to notice that the most of the population is unresponsive or uncooperative. When you began to plug back in, Kristof, how did you find your way? Because you did not you dabbled in the military with the writing, right? You said you dabbled in there, but hadn't really allowed the manifestation of it to its fullness. Um, how did you assimilate back in and with your profession, number one, and what was happening to you? Because you still have to deal with all of these powerful emotions, Kristof. What tools did you start to bring into your life to help you to manage through anger, depression, anxiety? What were those tools that you were bringing in as companions to help you walk through?
Well, I was writing. I started to write because short stories,
Yeah.
and because I really didn't. I didn't realize that how much some of the things that had happened while I was in the Navy had bothered me. How
Yeah.
much it bothered me. For example, I lost a shipmate to to suicide. And in fact, it's really quite strange. I went to go. I had to fill out forms for the VA for disability. Jeez,
Mhm.
dude. And I think about my friend Tom like almost every day. I can't help it.
Yeah.
And but I had gotten I thought I had gotten past like the grieving period, like because it's been over a decade.
Yeah.
It's been like 15 years or something, 14 years. But one of the forms it says it asks you like how do you like how what happened, like basically what was the circumstances of this uh your situation, like this PTSD and a number of other things. And so I started to write about it, and for the first time in so long, I was sobbing because
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much it affected me still.
Yeah.
And it activated a different part of my brain. I had written things adjacent to reality, of course,
Hmm.
because I wanted to describe it in a way that was helpful for other people and not so
Yeah.
personal for me. Um, and ultimately, it would be described in the title of a short story I wrote, "All Wars End Alone,"
Yeah.
um, because it really does. That's how it stops. It's you can very rarely truly confide that personal war with another in a way that is whole and complete and satisfying.
Yeah.
Um, the number of times that I was with other veterans and we would discuss, our service in different ways. There were like regrets that I had,
Hmm.
and and they would try to comfort me, and try to tell me like, no, we're glad, that didn't happen to you, and they were sobbing, and it's an experience that I'll never forget,
Yeah.
um, because yeah, there's just so much uh, to try to come to understand. Uh, and yeah, I really struggled for a long time, but writing really helped me uh, to describe it and to name it,
Yeah.
which is an
All,
important part.
all, all of you guys, and you're absolutely right, Christoph, naming that ailment, if for lack of a better word, and I don't like
Yeah.
that, but naming it, identifying it, giving it a title, it in the human mind, we now know exactly what it is. If when we don't know what it is, it has a
Hmm.
degree of anxiety. But when we
Hmm.
know what it is, we are capable in our mind to identify, okay, you are the source of the problem. We are then able to manage it. But if it's unknown, we don't know how the brain is not. They have nothing tangible to
Hmm.
quantify to say
Something lives
you're the
within the
problem.
cloud.
Yeah, and once we get it, as Kristof said, once you identify it, guys, the reality of change is possible. And all of you guys that are military that are listening to us, this is a beautiful conversation. I want to, and I'm sure Christoph would make himself available to you guys that are struggling in your mind, in the arena of one's thoughts, um, and those thoughts that are coming back that causes reactions in and activating memory and all the other things, which brings up all the other things, if you will. Uh, Christoph is one that has been there, understands some of what you're going through, knows of some of those triggers, if you will, and I want to make him available to you guys. We're going to provide his information so you could touch base with him, because it's important as we are walking this journey that we remember that we are not alone. There are others that will walk with you and engage with you. So all of the military family that is out there, male or female, um, we have one of your own, if you will, that understands where you'll be able to trust and come differently than if he was not one of your own. And I'll provide all of his information so you guys could touch base with him and get his books as well, The Second Son. And he's working on a couple other books to help you to get through. So here you are, Crystal. You're bringing in, and I know in the military they teach you about the mindset. All of those are some of um, the hallmarks of being in the military. You utilize writing, journaling is another tool that
Hmm.
one can use to eh, get it out, bring it out so you can identify it. As you're moving through life, Christoph, and you're bringing these tools, when did it begin to transition and your gift began to crystallize, if you will, as you're moving through life? Because you're living, you're moving through all the different spaces of life, but your gift starts to become a little more crystallized, where it's going to become a full-blown mechanism by which you're going to become a servant through and from.
Hmm.
Walk with me through that journey as you're walking through it, and that thread of the disturbance that I need to write something. When did that started happening? That I need to really go into this, and what was that give birth to your first book?
Okay, well, the way I would describe my relationship with writing before is like knowing that there's a fire nearby because there's a shadow being cast. You know that
Yeah.
like there's but and so you know that I was near where I wanted to be as a writer and my understanding of how others. But it wasn't until I actually was on my first rewrite of my book that I was sitting by the fire and I knew where it was.
Hmm.
Because it it's one of those things that you
Christoph,
really.
let me interject here for this question. Um, how did that come about? How did the book come about? And why did you pick that assignment up to write the book? What was the incident, uh, those things that were churning, if you will,
Mhm.
that caused that for you to give birth to that thought that I need to put it down in a format where
Mhm.
I'm going to now write that? How did that come about?
Well, I was uh, Shakespeare. I was 30. I was 32 years old. I had just turned 32 a month,
Hmm.
not even a month before, and my Tourette's had become to the point where I started to injure myself all the time. You can kind of see it. Like you see my hand like this. It's normal.
Yeah,
The finger looks normal. This
yeah,
one is is quite. I
yeah.
mean, it's been rendered useless at some points because I've injured myself so much. the point is that there was so much I wasn't able to do anymore, and they were trying to find the work. British Columbia, the Canadian government
Hmm.
was basically trying to find me a job that I could do that was compatible with my disability. And they said they called me after like a month or so of looking, and the woman on the other end, her name was Erin, and she told me she knew that I worked as a journalist and I won rewards and that and photography and stuff and the other things, and she said I can't I can't find you anything. There's
Hmm.
nothing there's nothing based on everything that we've looked at. There's nothing for you. I mean, there's nothing. So maybe you should write. You said you loved that. You know, you should start writing again. I hadn't written in 5 years, um,
Yeah.
because my Tourette's had gone from simple like grunts and my ab muscles tightening to I was gouging my eyes out and punching myself in the face and jabbing my
Oh.
throat, and punching myself in the ear,
Hmm.
and I give myself black eyes, bloody lips, um, and I would punch myself in the groin. So many things that and so it was really not just distracting. It actually it was so much more than
Yeah.
that. I mean
Yeah.
it's like your body reminding you that you have no agency and you have no dignity.
Yeah.
And so she and I hung up the phone, and then 10 minutes later I started writing my book because I knew this was it. I either had
Yeah.
the writing, I either did the writing or I would die because
Yeah.
I wanted to live a life of consequence. And I wanted to do something worthwhile and helpful, like to serve others, right? And I did
Yeah.
with Shakespeare. I didn't. I wasn't. Now I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do that in the traditional way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had to start writing. I had to. I had to. I had no choice. And so for me, it was about it was about surrendering to that notion. And um, I had never written a book before. I'd written plenty of short stories,
Yeah.
and so I had really no experience with writing something that ended up being this thick. And you know,
Yeah.
in Texas, no, it is 225,000 words. You know, so
Yeah.
that's really big. I
Yeah.
mean, because if just for people that don't know, The Hobbit, which is a lot of people have read or looked at least, is 98,000 words. So
Yeah.
yeah. um, so I applied my theory that every scene is a short story, and that every
Yeah.
chapter is just a kind of a longer short story, and that every book is just a collection of those. And
Yeah.
so and who that are cogently and coherently um, synthesized. And so that's what I did. Um, I surrendered to that, and I went forward with what I knew, and that was it. I had,
Yeah.
I had a compass and a crudely drawn map.
Yeah, that is awesome. It's a powerful story, Kristof, because some of us, some of the greatest stories in military history that I remember reading was, and I can't remember the name of the general, but he and his men, it was just a few of them, and they had crossed the river, and he had burnt the boat,
Oh
and he
yeah.
told them, he says, straight ahead is the only way home.
Hmm.
What a powerful
Hmm.
imagery in your situation when she made that
Hmm.
phone call and burned the boat and said straight ahead is the only way. And
Hmm.
you, as that soldier, um, from this general saying that, it hit you. You said 10 minutes later. Imagine those soldiers just look at all those men and go, yeah, I want to see my family.
Hmm.
You in front of me is going to prevent me from. And they believe that, and they destroyed a greater army. And here you are in a similar situation where the boat was burned. There's no other income. There's no other thing. Nothing. This is it. And
Hmm.
you, the human being, when we are put in that situation, can achieve great things.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are listening to Kristof's story. It doesn't matter where you are, you can still achieve great things. But there's a degree of surrendering to allowing the great things to become manifested in your life. It is a journey. We call it, that's the only word that we know how to bring in writing. Kristof, if you know something in the art of writing that describe it differently, I would appreciate it. I would learn and say, but it it houses so much power and trust in oneself. All of those things we have to learn. And you said after your first rewrite of the book, it's then when you're sitting down in that space, the fireplace is crackling, and you are rereading your book, that you began to get a revelation of, I think I'm a writer. How did that feel?
Oh, wow. I remember thinking, first, it's important, I think, to know as if you to do anything, I think that you feel of consequence and to develop a skill that you think you have in the first place is to start simply and start
Yeah.
as simply as you can to develop it from there. I had a short story in my head that I knew that I wanted to start with. And then I wrote another short story, and then I wrote another one. And then, just like if you've ever read Game of Thrones, the first three
Mm-hmm.
chapters are of different people in different parts of the world. And then you realize that then the rest of the book is describing and learning how those three stories come together. Well, that's what you should be doing with anything, in any kind of project, any kind of skill you want to develop. You start as simply with what you know, and try to make something that you can be with modest pride, and to do it very simply, and to not overextend and not dream. You can dream big, but the execution begins word for word. And so, yeah, like there's so many. The word surrender has come up so many times, but yeah, it's. Uh, I like to say complexity is not conceived, it's earned.
Yeah. Yes. I agree.
And so,
I
yeah,
agree.
and so you can't just conceive and create all these. It really starts with a simple premise, and that's with any kind of trade, any kind of job. It's always the same. You have one impetus that says, I like this thing about this thing, and then you flourish you're blooming from that seed.
Yeah.
Um, and and so yeah, I forgot the rest of what I was saying,
Yeah,
but
it's what Christoph is saying is absolutely right, because you have to, if in the corporate world they tell us to take it in incremental steps,
Mhm,
if you will, your big project, you break it down into smaller aspects, and so you can manage it. It is a part of a bigger vision,
mhm,
but when you bring it down into smaller pieces, you're still working on the bigger vision. And one of the things that you have to understand is to allow the time for it to develop, because this pressure of, you know, getting it done and all that stuff, we bring in some other pressures that is not necessary.
mhm,
Allow your creativeness to explore,
mhm.
whatever that means in any other, it doesn't matter what job you're in, it doesn't matter, it's the same principles. Allow your
Yeah.
creativeness to explore, and you will be able to see different vantage point when you're looking at your singular situation. You will have different ways to look at it that will bring a more um, uh, clear nuances to it that will empower those changes as you begin to look forward in your grandness of what you're trying. But take incremental steps. It is probably the most
Yeah.
powerful things you'll do in your life. You're not going to get burnout. You're not going to get distracted. None of that. So,
The,
as
yeah.
Christoph said,
The other thing, I was going to say really quickly, the other thing was that I discovered Charles Dickens, which was the most
Hmm.
powerful and transformative part of was realizing that there was someone who uh, who was kind of a rainbow in the sky. Like you realize that there is the way that he wrote and the way that he thought really um, it was of the same music and was at the
Yeah.
same tempo and at the same attitude towards the world and the same kind of cynicism, the same kind of love and affection for other people. And but they did it in such a he did it in such a beautiful way. I it really so it whenever I learned whenever I saw how his work was kindred to mine in many senses, at least in thought, imitating imitating his style um, became it really empowered me because I realized that
Yeah.
I could do it like I was trying to do it like him. And now, just so everybody knows, my work is recommended reading. Like I learned that my book is actually like recommended reading in Victorian literature classes studying Dickens. My
Hmm.
first book, and my book is self-published less than a year ago. It'll be a
Right.
year in 6 days, and it's already recommended reading in a class. Like I don't know the people that are and the people.
Congratulations.
I cannot stress to you how
Yeah.
like that how big of an achievement that is, especially for someone
Yes.
who had zero readers and no one knew who
Yeah.
I was even a year. Nobody knew who I was
Yeah.
till July of last year. So
Yeah.
6 7 months ago, and now that's what it's already achieved. So like it really is an important thing to find a model that of something that you respect and that you feel like you can imitate because I mean just like anything else, that's what it is. You find
Yeah.
something that you can aspire to. That's something concrete, something that's already been done is an important thing. It's
Yeah.
imperative.
It has to be tangible and achievable, and you can look
Hmm.
at it and quantify it and see where you're at and so forth.
Hmm.
These are, as Kristof is talking, these are powerful principles and tools that you can utilize. And again, we're going to provide everything for you guys to get access to him. He will assist you to and teach you and tutor you in your expression of your emotions that you have sitting in there. And he talks about it that the tool that we utilize to make that expression is called writing. And he will assist you how to begin to excavate some of those qualities that are residing there. One of the principles in the Bible that I remember reading was it says, write down the vision so that when the others are reading it, it's clear, it's understandable. And as
Hmm.
you said, your your gift will always open doors for you. It is designed that way. Um, you may
Hmm.
not know, but once you have given birth to that child, just like any other parent, you don't know the the potential of that child, but that child has great potential, and so you're seeing the results of your child that you gave birth to. That
Hmm.
that child has great potential, and people are coming back and talking about the impact of that
Yep.
child that you had given birth to, and how it's and that is why uh, we are full circle, Kristof. What do you do for mankind? There it is,
Yep. People admire
crystallized
passion.
from one's gift. Yes, yes. And so, man,
Hmm.
you have a powerful story, and we didn't even go into a lot of details, but I wanted you guys to get a chance to talk and hear and listen and get familiar with him because he has a powerful story. And we're going to provide everything for you guys to have access to him because I need you to get his books. There are many of you that know of families. It's a small percentage of Americans that are serving within the military and the great sacrifice that their families have made for us and the ideals that we call America. Uh, purchase the book, give it to those that are in need of the advice of someone who's been there, who's struggled to understand, and who has made a way out. Um, as Kristof said, you know, even in him, and I always use this example to you guys, when you're reading your book, get yourself in a state where you're comfortable, because when you do that, revelation will happen and the distractions are gone. Your being is in a state, and that state, the theta wave state and all this stuff that your mind will go into on a by itself, brings you into a space where you're able to accept things that will change your life. And you need to be in that state. And Kristof gave an example. He was in that state. He read his book and he got revelation as to who he was. And you will do the same in your life. This has been really good, man. And I'm glad that we got a chance to have this discussion, and to make you known to the audience, because he has a story and I need you guys to get into his space. Kristof, I thank you so much, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. We got to bring you back and talk even more about some of those other lessons that you have hidden in you that we want to excavate so we could learn from you, man. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Ken.